Hello and welcome to Are You Ready to Preserve? Today we're going to talk about pressure canners. This video is brought to you by Family and Community Health Sciences, a part of Rutgers Cooperative Extension. I'm Daryl Minch, the Family and Community Health Sciences educator in Somerset County. If you like to can foods that are things like carrots, peas, corn, beets, maybe some chicken or fish or a soup or a spaghetti sauce with meat. Those are what we call low acid foods. And as you study about food preservation, you'll know there's two different methods for preparing foods for saving in what we call canning jars. Okay, we're talking about canning in glass canning jars. I encourage you to check out our other video on canning equipment, because all the equipment is the same except for the pots. So those low acid foods, almost all vegetables, meats, poultry, fish, and combination foods are done in a pressure canner. There are two styles of canners. I only have an example of the weighted gauge. I'll talk about the dial gauge canner. A weighted gauge canner has this weight. It has holes in the edges, and it will allow you to have 5, 10, or 15 pounds of pressure. It fits on the top of this petcock, which is just a tube with a hole in it at the top of the lid. In a dial gauge canner, there is a weight, which is used to keep steam in the canner, and then there is a dial. And that dial has a hand and it has numbers and it moves like a thermometer or any other dial would work. And it is the dial that indicates the pressure within the canner. And again, it'll go from, 5 to, 20 pounds of pressure as indicated on the dial. Both canners work really well. And I'll talk about the pros and cons of either one. What I like about the weighted gauge canner is that it is accurate because the weight never changes. It doesn't have to be checked in any manner. This one came with my job. It is over 6 years old and it still works. The dial gauge canner is only as accurate as the dial. So it's very important to check that dial's accuracy. The recommendation is once a year. If you don't check it once a year, you'd certainly want to check it periodically if you ever dropped it or banged it, to make sure that it's accurate. If the dial's not right, then the food in the canner will not be safe. So let's talk about the parts on a weighted gauge canner. So it's a really simple but very easy to do pot. So first of all, the pot has a very heavy lid. There are different styles. This one twists on and off, and I'll try to show you that after. It has this weight. It has a vent or a petcock on here that allows steam to come out of the canner, and with the weight on, the steam will build up inside, creating pressure, and that allows the temperature to be higher than that of boiling water and keeps our low acid foods processed properly so that we can have a safe product. In modern canners, there is always a safety plug in the canner. This one happens to be gray, it might be black, it might be red. And that plug is there so that if the pressure was to build up too high in the canner, this plug would pop, steam would come out, and the pressure would be safely released. People used to talk about the fact that canners, both pressure canners and pressure cookers, used to explode because the pressure would get too high, lids would pop off. Well, in today we have this safety feature in our canners so that that doesn't happen. There is a rack in the bottom of the canner. This is a flat rack, and some canners have 2 racks. The rack would allow you to stack pint jars 2 on top of each other. I've never done that. Quart jars, just need 1, but it keeps the jars off the bottom of the pot and allows the water and steam to circulate. So this would go on the bottom. You only use the second rack if you were doing 2 layers of jars. Which brings me to a very important point. When you purchase a canner, you want to read the user's manual. Of course, it's going to talk about safety, but it's going to tell you about the parts, how to use them, how to replace them, and put them back together. That's really important. If you inherit a pressure canner, go online and see if you can't get the use and care manual online. So that's a really important piece. So this canner has really one important part here. This is a rubber gasket. It should be flexible, not dried out. This is a replaceable item if the manufacturer is still in business. As I said, this one's very old. There is also here a button in here that's a part of a locking mechanism so that when the canner is under pressure, you will be unable to open the canner. So for this canner, see here, you're going to put the lid on and you twist the canner so that this locks, and I can pick this up now and it's not coming apart. Under pressure, I will not be able to open it up by twisting. Practice opening and closing the lid. I always find it's a little tricky to get it to line up properly, but give that a little practice. Some lids have, let's put it this way. Some lids have screw pieces on the top. Again, the directions will tell you. There's usually a pattern. You might tighten this one and this one, this one, this one, until they're all adequately tight. All methods work. Again, everyone's a little different. On a dial gauge canner, it will be the same thing. You will still have a way to put the lid on tight. You will have to put the weight on at some point during the canning process, and you will then read the dial to make sure the canner is accurate. The question comes up, where do you get your dial gauge canners checked if you if you didn't buy it brand new? Couple of possibilities. One is to contact the manufacturer. Sometimes they will allow you to send back just the dial they unscrew for calibration, and then they would return it to you. There may or may not be some sort of fee for that. Some cooperative extension offices have testers. They don't work with every canner. We generally suggest that you bring in the lid only. We don't need the bottom, just the lid, or if you can get the dial off the dial itself, and then it sets on a very simple tester apparatus, and it compares the pressure on your dial to a master gauge, and if they match, good. If they're off by more than a few pounds, they recommend replacing the gauge. Dial gauge canners, to pick those up at something like a yard sale, I would really hesitate, because unless you have a manufacturer that is still in business that could replace that gauge, you can't be sure that the gauge is still good. So either one is acceptable. The beauty of the weighted gauge is there's no parts to calibrate at any point in time. The dial gauges work really well. They're nice and accurate, but only as accurate as the gauge. So those are the parts for your pressure canner. The how to use your pressure canner is part of some of our webinars on pressure canning. So read directions that come with your pressure canner, and that'll be good. I do get questions about using the electric pressure cookers for canning, and some manufacturers have said, oh, it'll work with small jars. Currently, there are no good studies out there that attest to the reliability of using a pressure cooker for canning. So all of our cooperative extension system recommends against doing that. They want pressure canners to hold at least 6 jars in order to maintain the proper temperature, and until such time that they have good data, reliable data, to prove that a pressure cooker could be used for canning, we do not recommend that. So purchase a pressure canner. It is a very large pot. It is not the smaller pots, electric or stovetop, that are available for cooking quickly at home. So thank you for being part of our Are You Ready to Preserve series. Take advantage of some of our other videos and webinars, And thanks for listening.